So I'm going to go ahead and start our first session with Dr. Gary Audas, and I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary Audas, who's a good friend of mine and a great collaborator of mine. I worked with him for a long time, and he and Sandra are great to work with. But Dr. Gary Audas is the Executive Director of Educational Outcomes, which is a Virginia-based nonprofit centered on trauma-informed solutions for learners all over the world. Currently, Dr. Audas is working in Lyon, France, in partnership with both the Lycée Saint-Ursule and Verbal Aikido on researching nonviolent communication techniques in learning platforms in France. And he is also working on completing his second book. His past project included the development of management of a trauma-informed GED prep program for at-risk adults, as well as trauma-informed teacher training program in the Middle East, as well as adult literacy programs in Texas. Dr. Audas holds a doctorate in literacy from Sam Houston State University. We went to the same program, and has both an 8th grade history teacher and a university level faculty member preparing incoming teachers for their chosen profession. So he worked in K-12, which means here in the US, primary school to high school, and he worked in higher education. And then I'm gonna let Dr. Audas start his presentation.
Thank you, Fadia. And thank you, Sandra. I just want to take a little bit of time before we get started to thank you all for joining us today. I know it's a Saturday, so I'm going to go through this slow and easy. Sometimes I get excited, so I talk really fast. So I don't want to, I understand there might be a language barrier here on some of this. So if I start going super fast, raise your hand, Gary, please, Dr. Gary, please slow down. Okay. I'm going to talk to you today, and let me start sharing my screen about trauma-informed education. Trauma is this thing that pervades society. It's not specific to any one group, any one person, any one race. It is something that is, to me, it's crippling a lot of educational outcomes across the planet. You know, I've worked in places as different as Kenya, Turkey. We've done trainings inside Syria. Obviously, we have a research project going on in France right now that, you know, it's a lot easier to do trainings and research in France. But in the United States, you know, it's not all hearts and flowers either. So especially in, you know, I'm from Texas, which is in the southern part of the United States, and Texas is 50th out of the 50 states in America in spending on mental health. And that filters its way down into, there we go. And that filters its way down into the classroom tremendously, especially for young people. In adults who have spent a life dealing with trauma, it also hurts their, and I keep saying educational outcomes because, you know, that's one of the reasons why we named the charity that. But I'm going to get started today. We're going to talk for a bit, and then if you have any questions at the end, we'll go. Okay. All right. So here's today. I want to thank Jewel and Fadia for helping to set this up today. It has been absolutely wonderful working with both of them, and being able to just to have access to the Algerian people has been wonderful. So thank you all for being here. Like I said, my Arabic or French is non-existent, so I'm going to do obviously all my talking in English today. So education in Algeria is what we're calling this on our end, and I'm just going to get started. Okay, trauma's effects on learning. So, you know, I start out all of these with this quote, and it's never more prescient to me to get this. You know, I'm going to do, you know, I know some people hate this. Some of this is going to be, I'm going to, some people are like, oh God, don't read the slides to me. There's going to be a lot of, information in here. So some of it, it's going to be easier if I read it, especially if there's a language issue. So don't think that I'm going to just read you the whole thing that you can read yourself. But so there's a sociologist called Elsie Bolding. She said, if one is mentally out of breath all the time from dealing with the present, there's no energy left for imagining the future. Meaning that if you're constantly spending your time worrying about where to get some food, where to get water, where to have a safe place to sleep every night, the last thing you're thinking of is your education and how that educational transformation can change your world. So it's incumbent upon teachers and it's not all just teachers too. I want to be clear that some of you may volunteer at a civic center or a learning space, or this is for all people who help deal with trauma. And one of the caveats, or one of the things that I want to bring to your attention at the beginning is that we're not trying to make teachers into psychiatrists or sociologists or or we're not trying to turn you into a therapist. You're a teacher and your job is to teach and to do what you're trained to do and to be specialized. But this is just going to be a series of ideas that you need to be understanding of in your learning spaces, that people are going through things, and those things that they go through affect how they see and view the world. But it also, on a cognitive level inside their brains, trauma affects how they interact with you, and it affects how they understand learning as a whole. So, and we're going to talk about some of those things as we go, okay? Or I think we are, as soon as I can figure out how to advance, okay? I'm so busy admitting people. Let me do this. All right, so what we're going to talk about a little bit today is, this is just an overview. We're going to talk about trauma and its effects on learning. I've been talking about that. So we're going to talk about what trauma is, and then its effects on learning. And then the second session later today, after my colleagues have talked a little bit this afternoon, we're going to talk about some trauma-informed solutions for the classroom, and then we're going to take questions. But I'm actually should have interlaced questions in there twice. When we get done with this first part, we're going to ask questions as well. So, and I use this picture, sometimes I try to be funny, and, a lot of these other pictures in here and some of these other stories aren't going to be so great, but, I put this one here, and it's just, sometimes it can just be absolutely frustrating to try to deal with your outside life. I spent the last 7 years working with adult learners in the United States, and it's, a lot of these people didn't grow, 100% of them didn't graduate from our high school system here. So, and I look at it all the time is, can you imagine being a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old person who is living in poverty, who has been affected by homelessness, and who may have been on some level abused, either physically, emotionally, sexually, and then try to interlace into that all of these things that you have to do to become an adult on top of that. So keep in mind all those things that can happen to any young person, and even adults. Trauma is not specific to young people. Old people, older people, listen to me, old people, I'm old. So, older people have problems all the time too. And when you're focusing on those issues, you're not worried about idiom. You're not worried about, conjugating verbs. You're not worried about those things. You're worried about, oh my God, how do I stop this from hurting? So, all right, I'm going to launch off into this. Let me get what passes for coffee for me. Hang on. Come on. Okay, so why are we here today? We're here to talk about trauma and as it disturbs the processes used by children, adolescents, and adults to learn. Some of this is going to be sciencey. I'm going to, but we're going to break that down and make it easy, okay? And we're here to talk about how trauma raises barriers and how teachers can work to remove these barriers is part, whoops, there's a typo already. Forgive me. The barriers is part of a critical discussion we're going to have today. So trauma, bad. Okay. Remember that part. Okay. But we're also going to discuss ways that trauma can affect classroom understanding. So I need to move this over. So families, ethnicities, countries, and cultures without strong traditions related to learning cannot pass these on to the next generation. And what does that mean? And just think of it, and forget the part about countries and forget the part about cultures, but think about families. Somebody, you have a friend who's doing well, goes all the way through their, their younger schooling, and then all of a sudden they're in college, and the next thing you know, they're in a good job. And you're like, well, why isn't that part of my life? And what I have to say about that is it's a lot of families and a lot of people have different what we call institutional knowledge, meaning that their families at some point in the past have gone through some of the things, and I use myself as an example. My younger sister was the first one in our family to go to college. And, my parents were both, we grew up poor, they grew up poor, and they had no understanding of what it took to go to school. All they knew was, let's get up and go to work every day and take care of my family. And I know that is a lot of your families as well, and your parents and your dads, So, but some families at some point in time throughout their life cycle have understood, like now all of our family can go to school. So it's important to understand that the starting point in all of this is not always the same. Some of it's money, some of it's status, some of it's but it's education perpetuates itself from one generation to the next. So when we make those sacrifices for our kids, and we make those sacrifices for our own education, and we see our parents trying very hard and pushing to get an education, do this, do that. It's not always about them pushing you too hard. They understand the difference. I taught in a school in Africa about 10 years ago in the summer in Kenya, and every student failed every test in every class in every subject. They did. For the national exams, every single one of them failed every class, but they were still there every day. It's important because they understood that this education thing that the world has is one of the surest ways to a different life, and what I call agency, meaning that you can decide for yourself how you want your life to play out. If you're educated, if you don't like your job, you can change your job because you know how to attain the skills that are able to make you move forward in life. If your boss is yelling and screaming at you and you know that that's not the best way to go, you have agency. You can go, you know what, I can advocate for myself and I can move forward. So education is just this thing for me. I grew up, like I said, I grew up not so great, hearts and flowers, when I was younger. I had great parents, but we were poor. But education has transformed my life. It's made me be able to have options and to be able to sit here 35 years after I got out of grade school and have these educational conversations with you. It's a never ending thing. So, all right, guys, I'm going to turn to the heart of this. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about trauma and some definitions. If I can continue to figure out how to advance this, I am. So, hang on just a second. I think we went too fast. All right, so populations and trauma, and when I say populations, this was more of an academic presentation earlier. When I say populations, I just mean learners, people, yourself, who have been exposed to trauma. There's got to be somebody that we're dealing with today in this thing. There's got to be teachers like Julio and Vadia who are both. It's the people they come in contact with every day. So these are just learners. So A large percentage of learners are affected by traumatic experiences. This includes persons that have been exposed to poverty, both situational and generational, meaning that sometimes you just don't make enough money to pay the bills this month. That's what situational poverty is. Generational poverty is you and your family have been poor for generations. Homelessness is one of the big driving factors. Homelessness is a trauma. If you can't figure out where you're going to sleep every night, or you're staying at friends' houses, things like that, that's a traumatic experience for you. Abuse and neglect, as well as both emotional and physical abuse. That's somebody, you're one of your parents being mean to you constantly. It's, does your boyfriend or your husband abuse you emotionally? Neglect is, the lack of love, but there's also physical abuse, and then there's sex and labor trafficking. And we all know what those things are. A lot of the young women that I work with here in the United States have been victims of that. So, but there's also historical factors related to disenfranchisement. So there is, and what does that mean in English? It means that there are, I use the example, and I'm sorry to have to keep using American examples, but I'm not Algerian. So when I say historical factors, we think about the stigma that's still attached to slavery in the United States. We think about the Holocaust for Jewish populations. We talk about the plight of the American Indian and the genocide that's perpetuated against those. A lot of times those societies have this generational stigma where there's trauma pervades their entire culture. Think about a group of people in your country that have been perennially, like every year, there's, from antiquity or throughout history, something is constantly happening, So these can be trauma inducing for those left outside of the power structures. And sometimes just being poor is enough. You're automatically put into this class of people that shouldn't succeed or should be kept in their place. That's what I used to hear. Well, aren't you trying to get a little bit above who you really are? Which is, to me, tremendously offensive. So, your family was poor. Look at your dad. He was a truck driver or something, and I'm like, well, does that mean I'm supposed to, do this my whole life? I'm not supposed to have a future. So that's just something to think about, because a lot of people outside of the world that I live in with this trauma informed stuff are like, trauma is violence. Trauma is, somebody got raped or murdered, or, your parents got in a car crash. But it's all these little things too that add up to who that person is inside. If I could figure out how to constantly change this, my life would be perfect. Oh, there we go. So what is trauma? And this is going to be simple. Trauma is well, it's not going to be simple. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be very complex and very terrible. I'm going to tell you that. But there's a simple explanation. Trauma is an emotional shock that causes lasting psychological damage. And think about that for a second while I drink some of this. Hang on. It's an emotional shock that causes lasting psychological damage. So, and it doesn't matter what that is, and and we don't get to decide how that affects us, how that affects somebody else. We don't get to decide. It's just something that is so psychologically damning that it prevents that person from being able to move forward. And part of your job as a teacher is to understand that and to not judge for them, why this is important and why this hurts them. So traumatic events vary in intensity and vary with the person's ability to respond to the disarray and often long-lasting effects of that trauma. Varying in intensity. For me, I'm 53 years old. Things roll off me a whole lot easier than they used to. But when you're young and, your boyfriend's being mean to you or your girlfriend's being mean to you, or you break up with somebody, it's very traumatic, especially for young people. This relationship is who they are. But it's important to understand, I'm going to keep saying it's important to understand all of this so as I interlace this through this is important to understand. These are critical points. Childhood exposure to trauma can cause adverse consequences when that child reaches adulthood and is a major risk factor for development of psychological and behavior problems later in life. Kids that are abused are constantly exposed to traumatic experiences, carry that into their adulthood. So when you're talking about, somebody in your adult ESL class, it is exactly the same as it is for young people. The effects of trauma are prevalent and part of who they are. When you grow up with these defense mechanisms, if you walk up to a horse and you do this to it and it shies away because it's been beat so many times, the same thing is that way for kids and adults. If you get broken down and abused, I have students that are constantly telling me that I'm too stupid to do this, Mr. Gary. I've been told my whole life, my mom thinks I'm the dumbest person in the world. And you start to believe those things, and those are traumatic. So traumatic events vary in intensity and vary with the person's ability to respond. Like I said, it doesn't matter what that traumatic event is if they can't cope with it. Okay. Whoops, I need to move this over here. Look at this. I even found a little thing that says it's important. And to me, this is the heart of the classroom teaching. It's important not to realize that we don't get to decide how trauma affects a person. I've said that, and this will be that clarifying statement at the end. Not all persons are apportioned the same ability to cope with a stressful event or it's another typo or series of events. So, I use this as an example all the time. I started this whole trauma-informed journey back in 2017. I went over to Turkey to try to find a way to help mitigate educationally some of the issues with the war that's going on in Syria. Turkey took in like 4 million Syrian refugees. And so I go over there and I'm having a conversation with a teacher, and the teacher tells me, Mr. Gary, this child has only lost one parent. So they're way better off over here than this child who's lost both of their parents. And first of all, you sit there and think of the horror of that. And then you start having a conversation in your head about how a teacher rationalizes that, And then I've had other like school administrators tell me, this young lady's very fortunate. Her husband was killed in the war. So she's allowed to leave the house so she can help take care of her family. So, in any kind of conversation that I normally have with people that reflects around, she's lucky that her husband got killed, is very hurtful, because you're already deciding what is important for those kids and what is not, and how they cope with that, And it's the same thing for adults, it's not so bad for you, it's not the end of the world. You'll be fine. I was fine, so you'll be fine. You went through a divorce, so I went through one too. You'll be okay. This is the highlight of this whole thing. It's important to realize that we do not get to decide how trauma affects a person. It's not your job as a teacher to do that. It's your job to recognize that, try to make classroom modifications to help, and then try to find at what level the professional is. At what level of help that student needs. Some of your schools have resources for this. Some of them don't. I know in the United States, in some schools, they have one counselor per 1,000 students. So can you imagine how many things happen to 1,000 people on any given day? And you have one person that deals with that. So often a person who experiences a car wreck, physical violence, or the loss of a loved one is dealing with a traumatic event for them. That's the important part of this, for them, on the same level as another who may have been caught up in combat or has been sexually assaulted. So again, and I keep doing this and I keep stressing this, we don't get to decide how a person reacts to their trauma. It hurts and we have to deal with it. I keep having to move this around because okay, so trauma. Learners who face traumatic events are often not able to reach adequate education levels and frequently face a lifetime of diminished socioeconomic and culture. So that's a nice way of saying is, if you don't have a right education, you're not going to be able to enter into a culturally happy place for you. And oftentimes you can't make enough money to take care of yourself. Education is the driver of that. Most of you here today are here to have a conversation about how to better speak English or how to get better grades in school. And that will often translate into a better job for you or better opportunities for travel. It's the same thing the world over, not the English part. I don't mean that, but it's education is the driver for success in a lot of cultures and a lot of reality more than anything. And it also, people that have poor educational outcomes, not only do they not make money, but they don't have the ability to get good health care. If you're poor in the United States, you don't have health care. You can't go to the doctor. So there's a million things that, and I'm not going to talk about a million of them, just like half a million of them. There's a million things that go with this, that it's not just about, it's this interlocking of ideas and understanding about trauma and you see how it ripples out across your life and the life of your students. Everybody having fun? Yeah. I'm leaving out the rough ones. I didn't really, if I could just figure out how to, there we go. So we're going to, we talked about what trauma is. I've given you my big speech about what do we do? When we notice traumatic effects in our classroom? We don't decide. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you're probably more interested in, which is trauma's effects on learning. And every time I give this talk all over the world, all people of all different levels, I had an interview the other day with an organization, one of the Vassar College in the United States, and I'm having this trauma-informed conversation with two of the professors there. And you don't know how often I hear that, oh my God, I never knew that was a thing. And, when you think about these people who have all these, all this education and all this learning, and then you have this conversation and half the people in the room didn't know these things existed and didn't know that they affected their classrooms. They're like, they just think little Bobby or Susie over here are being bad. They don't think about the fact that, well, maybe they didn't eat today. Maybe they didn't, maybe they had to, their parents were out all night, so they had to get their brothers and sisters up to go to school today. Maybe they're 15 years old and they have to go to work to help take care of their family. Maybe they're 10 years old and have to go to work to take care of their family. It's every single time I have this conversation in any social setting or any academic setting, there's always somebody that goes, oh my God, I can't believe this is a real thing and it's really happening. Well, it is a real thing and it is really happening. So one of the most prevalent, and these are going to be some of the things we're going to talk about, different things psychologically, psychosocial, cognitive, we're going to talk about those things. So there's high dropout rates. People become disengaged from that learning process to where this is too much for me. I cannot think about anything else other than, I'm going to go a little teachery and say, and I don't put this in here because I have this running bet with a lady that I work with in Houston and in Huntsville. There's a thing called Bloom's, not Bloom. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like a pyramid. And she swears that every educational presentation has to have that diagram in it. And I absolutely refuse to put it in there. But it's a pyramid that says, people have basic life needs, and a lot of people at the bottom, your food, clothing, and shelter, and water. A lot of people are flipping back and forth sometimes between those bottom two things. They don't get to go to the top of that, where they get to have self-actualization, where they can do what they want to with their lives. My wife and I can get up and go anywhere we want, do anything we want, because we have sat down and made the changes in our lives and we've addressed trauma in my life and her life, and we've addressed all these things. So but often people who are going through traumatic experiences are completely disengaged from the learning process. And they have difficulty managing those educational commitments. And I'm not trying to place a stigma on these people. I'm trying to get people to understand that people go through stuff, man. They go through stuff. And, when you're thinking about, I have to, my boss is asking me to work late, but I'm trying to go to take night classes, or that Saturday that I finally get a day off from work is the day that they have the MBA classes on weekends, where you get your business degree and persistent financial difficulty is the big part of that. I can't afford to go to school. And it's not even so much that I can't afford to go to school. Nobody in my family has the ability or the understanding to tell me how to apply for financial aid. I don't know how to go through that process. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about later is that I don't have the ability to mentally focus on a process for long enough to bring it to any kind of successful conclusion. Meaning that, sometimes it's a multi-level, series. Like, it's like my dad is this guy who, can't even get his prescriptions because it's so many steps, and I'm like, well, he's like, why can't you just do it for me? And I'm like, well, because you're a 75-year-old man. That's why. But they just don't understand. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. But, I do like to use this picture that, you notice this hand with words all through it, it's kids don't understand why you're being ugly to them. They don't know. So stop. No, I'm kidding. Come on, Dr. Audas, figure out how to use the PowerPoint. Okay, good. So trauma's effects on learning, cognition, what's going on in our heads, okay? And this is part of the heart of what this is here is that students are unable to engage in higher order thinking. And what is higher order thinking? It's abstract thought. It's being able to picture yourself in other situations. And it's not so much that when somebody talks to you about a science problem, you have to be able to visualize that in your mind. Excuse me. You have to be able to put things into motion abstractly to be able to understand. And if you can't do these higher order thinking things, if everything is just A to get to B to get C, then, at some point, that's fine. But as we progress into things become more complex. Think about all the things that Dr. Brocky and Jewel have been doing, and I have been, and Sandra have been doing in the background just to get this off the ground. There is, it's, y'all think, oh, let's just dial in today and we'll get this beautiful speech. But we've been talking about this for 5 weeks, and there's multiple steps and there's multiple things that interact to make this work. And thank God Fadia knows how to do all those things. So, and Jalul it's just amazing. But we have diminished memory, inability to sequence events. When you're talking to somebody about history and you don't know that the Romans came after the Greeks, while in the big scheme of things, it's not that important. But when you're talking about the history of the Romans, it is very important. It's contextual. They can't solve complicated problems. It's that multi-step thing that I keep talking about. We're in the process. This group that are helping you today or working with you today, we're in the process of trying to write grants for different things, and those things have multiple steps that bring you to a solution at the end. But to do those multiple steps, you have to be able to. It's complicated, and a lot of people don't have problem solving skills because nobody's ever taught them how to do X. People come to me all the time and say, "Well, God, I don't know how to do algebra," and I tell them, "Well, I don't either." But the other part of it is the thing is it's not that you don't know. It's somebody's never sat down and tried to teach you something, and you've been able to bring that into your life. It's not that you're dumb or, which I hate that word, but it's not that you don't understand. It's that it's outside of that context of that experience that you have of what goes on in your normal day. When I started going back to school 15 years ago, and after being a businessman for 20 years. I mean, it's just when you said, what, write me a page discussion on something. I'm like, what? I mean, why is that? Why do I have to do that? And there's part of it is you just have to do it, so. All right. So we've talked about cognition. Come on, Gary, come on. All right, here's some more. Often cannot focus or pay attention. If you have a long conversation with me, sometimes I am like over here and over here, and I circle around something, and like in this thing here, I'm telling stories, and then I stop and go off in a different direction. I mean, some of that is just my personality. Some of it isn't trying to be funny, but some of it is that it's hard for me to pay attention for an hour. And some things are extremely complex that you're trying to teach people, and they need to focus, they need to pay attention to it, and it's extremely hard. And, some of it is kids in their phones nowadays, it's, they can't focus on anything but that. I just turned my light on. That's great. But it's extremely, it's not that you're boring. It's not that they don't want to listen. It's just that sometimes young people and even older people physically cannot pay attention that long to something. And that is a direct relation to traumatic experiences. So inability to understand cause and effect. When you're trying to talk about this is where I interlace things in from American history that don't mean anything to y'all. So I will think about a cause and effect. You're driving down the road and another car comes, you swerve to miss it. What causes that and what's the effect of that? So, but that also goes into their personal life too, and the way they interact with people is that they don't understand that yelling at the teacher because of something that happened to them on the way to the class is there's a cause and effect of things. It's only what's happening in this immediacy of their lives at any particular moment. Okay. And here's again, the unable to engage in abstract thought, and for me, the abstract thought is the most important thing because they don't realize how to see themselves anything other than who and where they are right now. They don't, in the United States, I used to have a young lady who was African-American and Black in the United States. And she couldn't see herself as anything else. So I have a friend of mine who came, who sent over one of his prosecutors. She was a lawyer and worked for the government. And, this, like, when she walked in, the very first thing she said, "Are you here to put me in jail?" Instead of, "Oh my God, you're an African-American woman and I can't," she didn't think, she could never dream of seeing herself as anything other than what society and what her immediate surroundings had placed into that. She didn't have a way to envision or believe that she could be anything else. You have to be able to see these new worlds and to realize that. And people that don't read sometimes have a very hard time visualizing anything else other than that immediacy in front of them. So, and they cannot recognize or correct mistakes. So when you're trying to explain something to them, and a lot of people are A, B to get to C, and if B's messed up, they don't know how to fix it because they only know if I do this, I can do that. I get this. And if one of those pieces messes up, and then the worst part of that sometimes is they do A and B, and then C is wrong, and they don't know that C is wrong, so they go about thinking that they're right, and then they don't know how to fix that. So, all right. Come on. Ta-da. All right, so psychosocial. And this is, how you deal and interact with other people. It's take out the psycho and just put social. It's, how you interact with your friends, how you interact, who you are as a person. And remember, they're not doing this on purpose. An 8-year-old is not purposely trying to ruin your day. I don't know, Fadi, how old is your son? Is he trying to ruin your day on purpose?
Yeah, he's 15 months, and I think I told you at some point.
Well, he's doing it on purpose, right? So my little sister, and I say my little sister, she's 50. She just went on a cross country trip with like 50 students from Texas to Florida to go to Disneyland. And I can't, they stayed on a bus. They drove 18 hours to get there. And I'm like, and nonstop. I mean, that's like flying from here to China. And I mean, I can't imagine the, they're not doing it on purpose, but after a while it's, so anyway, so psychosocial, inability to get along in the school environment. The school environment is alien to a lot of people. It's regimented, meaning that there are rules, and there are rules that you have to follow. There are, I use it. I used to have this professor, Dr. Durham. She used to tell me, say, Gary, this is, you have to write a specific way, not so much behavior, but this is the language and the norms we use to talk to each other in this world. So when you leave that world, meaning the classroom for that day, you can act and be anything you want to be. And you can act and do however you want. You can, you can curse with your friends, you can drink, smoke, do whatever you want. But while we're in this environment, to try to become this person, we have to act and write and be a certain way. We have to use our inside voice, Gary, and we have to be nice to each other. We can't bully people. We can't do all these things. And a lot of people, I don't say a lot of people, some people, traumatic people, that, they have an inability to get along with the environment, and I use as an example now, my nephew just went into the military, and he's in boot camp right now, where they're yelling and screaming at everybody and, all these things. And he says that there are people that are still in there that, when you're in a class, you say, everybody be quiet. There's still, 4 or 5 people that are still talking, and they absolutely cannot be quiet. And he's like, I don't understand, how can you not, this is the environment you chose to be in, so you have to act a certain way. So difficulty with the classroom and academic experience. I have done, is one of the, I keep pointing to this, the United States, because one, it's what I know, but also I think it's interesting to see and hear that how other cultures deal with issues. So it's, a lot of people were made to come, if you get in trouble in the United States, if you get like a criminal offense or something like that, part of your sentence oftentimes is to get your education. They make you go back to high school, or they make you get an equivalency test or something like that. So the entire academic experience is foreign to them. They're just in here because they're being made to be in the classroom. So that's important to understand too. It's very hard to teach somebody that doesn't want to learn. And I said the beauty, one of the main reasons I work with adults is that you're an adult, you don't have to be here if you don't want to be here. So, but it's different when they're 10. You're responsible for a 10-year-old. So truancy, which just means they don't come to school, they're late. They, there's not a steady progression in their educational journey. So, and this impacts classroom integration. What if you're in there working on a science project and, and it's a 6-week project and you're gone for a week of that? It's not fair to your peers, and it causes issues. So fragmented identity, are you a student? Are you this? Who am I? They don't really understand. And oftentimes they can appear insensitive. Trauma's a rough world sometimes, but there's these social norms that don't come across well in the classroom. So give me a second, guys. I keep hitting my button like I know what I'm doing. Hang on. There we go. So emotional. Trauma's effects on learning, emotionally. Hyperarousal. And that doesn't mean sexually. That means that they're easily triggered, meaning that, excuse me, meaning that they're always, we have an idiom in the United States called waiting for the other foot to fall, meaning that they're always on guard, always waiting for the abuse to start again. they're very, very easy to trigger, meaning that when a teacher starts to raise her voice just to get control of the classroom, they take it as a personal attack. And any kind of slight towards themselves or their culture or their religion or anything like that, they're easily triggered. And that hypervigilance part of it too, like I said, always on guard. I've got students that are always looking at the door, waiting, either looking for a way to get out of the room, or they're waiting for somebody to come in and continue to hurt them. And once they get triggered, it is extremely hard to regulate that and to calm them down. I know when I get upset about something, it takes a lot to get me going. But when I get upset, I get angry, and it takes a while to slow me down. It's the exact same thing. Intrusive memories and re-experiencing trauma. This was the hardest thing for me when I used to teach 8th grade in the United States. That's probably 12 or 13-year-olds. And I'm a big guy, and I get loud, and I took this young lady out in the hallway, and I'm talking to her, and my voice, as I get more excited, I'm getting louder and louder and louder. And then there's a second there where she just completely shut down, and she goes, "You sound just like my dad. Are you gonna start hitting me next?" And I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And sadly, this part of this journey, this trauma-informed journey that I'm on to try to help people, it started because of conversations like that and not being able to know what to do and to understand the pain that you're causing people. So it's, they re-experience the trauma all the time. You have to be very careful about things, about what you do and talk about in class too. So traumatic nightmares, you're not going to really, hopefully they're not asleep in class, but a lot of times they'll talk about it. Disassociation, there's a lack of connection. There's, we have this thing in the United States to where everything is all of our history and everything is written from a certain point of view. So, and what does that mean in real terms? It means that if I walk into a classroom with 30 students and 20 of them are African Americans and 10 of them are Hispanic, meaning from Mexico and South America, their experience and understanding of America is different than me as a 50-year-old white person. So they don't have this connection to what I'm talking about sometimes. So whenever you're like today, a better example, and I told you I was going to do this, would have been to find and understand better issues that are pertinent to an Algerian classroom, which once I thought about it, I'm like, I have no idea how to find that. I have no idea how to, and I don't want to presume to talk about your history or what affects, and I found that it's, not a good idea to talk about religion and politics in any kind of learning setting. So, I like to use things from history, and, so forgive me for being, see, that's another thing about being insensitive. I hope that it's, what I say about the United States is interesting, but it's, it's much better when you as a teacher can talk about these ideas with something that's culturally relevant to your students. So, and what I normally get with students is total shutdown, especially young people. I'm not doing nothing. You can't make me do it, and you go to hell. And that's just the way it goes. And for teachers, this is important as well. This last one, the capacity to read cues appropriately. When you see a teacher getting amped up and you get that teacher face and you start, wagging your finger like an old man would do, they don't understand that things are about to get, out of hand, or that they're doing something inappropriate. But, teachers are on the other side of that. Sometimes they don't know their students well enough to know that they need to quit pushing that young person or that, or that student. I'm guilty of that. This young lady, when she was feeling triggered, she would pull her book out and start reading. I absolutely, for some reason, would not let her do that. And finally, sometimes she would just get up and run out of class down the hallway. And I'm thinking to myself, is that better? Is her freaking out and running out of the classroom better than, better than just sitting there letting her read? I didn't know that was her mechanism for self-soothing. So know your students, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about this afternoon. Emotional continued short. What is that? Hang on just a second. Short temper and angry outbursts. I'm sure you get this a lot, especially with young people. Usually adults have some kind of social norm to where, Jewel, if they're in your class and you're having a conversation, it's not jump up and let's fist fight, Usually if they have, built up enough of resistance to and decided to go to school, especially adults, that, there's, behavior is not really an issue. There is a lack of these, sometimes appropriate codes that people use, adults do with each other, that they don't understand. Sometimes they say things that are, like I have a gallows humor. Sometimes I say things that aren't really that funny to other people, but they're funny to me. And, but apprehension about the future, a lot of adults are their adult learners are, I don't want to say adults. I think a lot of people always are worried about their future. So, inability to control impulsive behavior. I mean, that's critical. You see a lot of kids that are banging on the table like this, they just can't stop, or there's that a lot of kids break pencils, just different things. There's things about them that they just can't stop. Persistent, distorted blame. I couldn't do my homework. My sister was talking, or my parents did this. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never look inside yourself for an answer. There's a negative self-image. We talked about this a little bit, and especially low self-esteem. When you've been told repeatedly that you're a piece of garbage and you're never going to amount to anything, like I said, you believe that, and a lot of that is control, and a lot of, I'm not a psychologist, but a lot of relationships are, the oldest graduate I had from the GED program, which is our, in America, it's our equivalency test, she was 63 years old. And, you don't need your high school diploma at 63, but she felt so powerful in getting it, because one of the first things that she did was divorce her husband. She's like, he's told me I'm a piece of garbage my whole life, and I wanted to prove to him that I'm not. So self-esteem and negative self-image are critical things that, that you as a teacher, it's very important for you to understand and see these things. I mean, I see part of my whole job is to be a cheerleader, to tell people that, you're doing absolutely wonderful and nothing else matters. Everything should be done in a positive light. And there's a thing here that we call constant positive regard. Constant positive regard. Use your ability as a teacher to try to craft a very important and beautiful narrative for these students. It's not your job to beat them down. Tell them that, oh my God, I can't believe you don't know that. My dad comes to me all the time and goes, can you believe this waitress didn't know this singer from the 1950s in America? And I'm like, why? I don't know that. Why would you're a 73-year-old man. Why would any 19-year-old waitress know who a singer was from the 1950s? And for you to think she's dumb because she doesn't know, I mean, think about the list of things that I know that you don't know. And then it gets really tense with your parents. But all right, intense reaction to everyday sights and sounds. It's that banging on the desk. Some kids get beat at home, and they know that's when that starts. So be careful about raising your voice. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know enough about the cultural norms in a classroom in Algeria, but I'm assuming you don't yell and scream at kids. Or if you do, sometimes, but anyway. I just read the other day that they're bringing corporal punishment back to classrooms in Texas, meaning that they get a board and they beat the kids with them. So look at Joel, he's like, yeah. All right, I was going slow and now I realize that I need to hurry. So hang on a second. So more psychosocial. I think I went the other way. All right, so a lot of the solutions to this are going to take place in the next series of slides. There's a lot of y'all in this, so I'm gonna take questions as they come. Does somebody want to help me out with this here?
Yes, Gary, how do you need help? So if anyone maybe if you have a question, unmute yourself maybe, or write it on the chat box. What do y'all think?
Well, some people have raised their hand. Are they high-fiving me or are they raising their hand?
Let's see, anyone has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask it, and Gary here will answer it. We only have 10 minutes, so. Or write it down in the chat box and we will answer it. So I see here, Halim, do you have a question? Okay, I see a question here that says, how can trauma affect learners' attention and focus? And how can we alleviate that? Gary, if you want to address that.
So, and that's a great question, because that's the big thing. You think that over time, well, let me do this. First of all, that's a great question. And that's one of the most important things, is that lack of attention in the classroom. Over time, you're going to learn what triggers that student, and you're also going to learn and understand better what can soothe that student. One of the things we're going to talk about this afternoon is ways to mitigate this. So some of these questions I may hold you off until the last part of it, but to the next session. But one of the things that we can do as a teacher is, say you have a classroom of 20 students, and there's, over time and over a school year, you're going to know and understand what makes these students tick. It is I say incumbent, but it is critical for you to know your students and to build this strong student-teacher relationship. So whenever you're talking about something specific in math, you know that person that can't pay attention, you try to engage them in the conversation and craft a question for them that draws their interest back into the classroom, into the topic itself. Like when I say, I have students that I know like a certain historical point, I'll bring up, remember that time we were talking about this battle or this, or this book that you read. You have to have this innate knowledge of your students and who they are to be able to help alleviate that. And I see, there's like 99 questions on here. I feel terrible. And here's one that says, how can you overcome trauma? So, eventually that is a big part of this, and as teachers, that's not always something that you're trained to do specifically. It's going to be, how deep is that traumatic experience? Some people never get over their trauma. It's, like, think about it. And, some people, each one of us, and if I just say you lose a parent, that never goes away, and it's always going to hurt, and it's always going to be this thing. But, we learn to cope with, we teach kids coping skills, and that doesn't mean that every once in a while it's going to be, it's going to be hard, but being able to work through that, those traumatic experiences with them is the best part of it. You got to let people talk about it. You got to let kids talk about it. You got to let them, that doesn't mean we all have in the United States, guys, we're in a terrible situation right now where people walk into schools and shoot kids, and that is this weird, horrific thing that happens nowhere else in the world, and these brave kids are doing these amazingly, courageous things and talking about it and helping. I'm about to cry thinking about it. It's so horrific here that, I'm sorry, let's ask another question. Let's get off of killing kids.
Yeah, so the other question I'm trying to go through in line, and if we don't answer all the questions, you can always email him. So the other question is, does corporal punishment have an effect or help with behavior issues?
Well, I got to tell you, corporal punishment in the United States is something that it's been done away with since the 80s and 90s. You know, I remember when I was a kid in school 30, 40 years ago, even longer than that, you know, I got paddled, hit, and it did absolutely nothing to modify my behavior, you know, because at a certain age, when they're young, they don't understand why you're doing it to them. You're not addressing the core issue that's causing them to act out that way. You're not, you know, it's like anything. I mean, you know, why is the economy bad in a society? Well, we're not doing the things we need to. We're not saving money. We're not working hard. We're not doing infrastructure. We're not doing any of the groundwork to fix the underlying problem by just beating kids. Sometimes you want to, because you're like, man, if I could just get my hands on you, but it's not a thing, you know, it's not something that I feel that should be done in classrooms. So I can't imagine, especially you know, in the US, it is extremely, we sue people all the time, you know, and if you beat kids too often, you know, you're gonna, you know, it's terrible. So anyway, so this is a good one. Autistic students considered as having traumatic experiences. You know, I think autism is different than, you know, it is a diagnosed issue that are dealt with in specific ways. You know, I'm not an expert on special education or autism, so I can't really speak to that, but I do know that diagnosed mental health issues are different from this, because autism is not brought on by some kind of traumatic experience. It's like dyslexia. You know, you can fix, you know, dyslexia is a common, you know, reading issue, but it is also a processing issue where you can do, it can be combated, but there are certain learning disabilities that no matter how hard you try, that person is never going to be able to read. Or, you know, my nephew, like I said, is in the military now. He has what we call dyscalculia, which is he can't, you ask him what 5 + 5 is, and he's like, he absolutely cannot process that and will never be able to process that. You know, I don't think we're ever going to, you know, somebody just asked up here, preventing trauma. I think it's very important to prevent trauma in the classroom and from traumatizing students, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to prevent traumatic experiences from happening. All of us are going to eventually lose our parents, our dog dies, you know, somebody's going to get in a car wreck, there's going to be a war, you know, people are always going to be poor, you know, people are, you know, there's always going to be homelessness, there's always going to be poverty, you know, but coping with trauma is what I feel like is our job. You know, when you ask here, what is the best practices to help students cope with trauma? We'll talk about that in the next slide. I mean, the next presentation. Does that work? How do you save me?
Yes. So I can see all your questions. You all want to know how to cope with trauma, how to help your students who have been through trauma. So Gary's second workshop is going to cover that. So y'all don't worry, we're going to answer those questions. So I think that was a good, like, I don't know, but you can all educate me on this. I don't think in Algeria we do special ed. Gary, you were asked about autism and you're talking about dyslexia. I'm so happy you addressed that those are two different things, that dyslexia and autism were not caused by trauma. I thank you very much for saying that. And it's just making me think that we need the special education workshops in the future. But
so, you know, there's so many things, guys, you know, and I wish that please reach out to me via email. I mean, I don't want to feel like there's so many of you on this that I absolutely do not want to feel like that I'm not answering your questions. but I mean, it's in a forum like this, it's impossible. I mean, there's hundreds of questions here. And there's not near enough, Mr. Audas, you're amazing. I've noticed that on here, but we can work on that. We can work on that. So, so, you know, I mean, I read these, I realized I had trauma at a certain level. I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes addressing it in ourselves and how we cope with that is sometimes providing that example as a teacher. And we'll talk more about that this afternoon.
Yes, all your questions are going to be addressed in Gary's second session. So don't you worry, y'all. So
well, let's not say all of them, but no, I'm going to do my best. No.
And again, like Dr. Audas said, you can always reach out to him through emails, which we will share, and he will share, and we will share, and we'll send you an email after all the sessions are done. So I think we're close to closing our first session, and we'll take a 10 minutes break. Do not exit unless Gary has something else to add before I close this.
I do want to, I'm going to put this, we're going to share this. I'm going to put this PowerPoint up at the end so y'all can have this. And I do have somewhere, I have a lot of this translated into Arabic. If that will be helpful, I may need to get that to Fadia and make sure that my translations are where they should be, but and we'll go from there. But guys, thank you so much. This information will be up and my contact information will go from there. Okay.
Yes.
I'm actually going to just mute myself and get away for a bit. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Audas, very, very much. We had a beautiful conversation on the chat box. You did great. It seems that the participant enjoyed it, and we're able to have a very insightful conversation on the side while you were presenting. So we're really grateful for your workshop right now, and thank you very much, Gary. So right now it's time for us to take a 10 minutes break. Please, I'm going to keep the link on. Everything's going to stay on. Just you're already muted. No issues. We'll be back I am in a different time zone than you all. So we'll be back at 3:10 minutes, 3 to 10. 3 and 10 minutes. So take 10 minutes break, and then we'll see you in 10 minutes.